Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining our webinar today, Artificial Intelligence, Your Questions Answered, and the launch of the ASPI and Australian Institute of Machine Learning shared paper on this topic. First of all, just to get started, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we are coming to you from today. Here in Canberra, that is the Ngunnawal people. And I would like to pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are dialing in today. Now, first, if I could also please give special thanks to Professor Tanya Monro, Professor Simon Lucey, Professor Anton van Hengel and Dr Catriona Wallace, who are joining us this evening for a discussion about AI and the paper that has been released. We're incredibly excited and lucky to have you with us today. What will happen is that Professor Monro will start with a short opening address, and then we'll have a panel discussion followed by audience Q&A. For people who are dialed in remotely, please add your questions into the Q&A box, and I will get to as many of them as we can, but I am sure that we're going to have plenty of questions for today's session. So again, quick introduction. Professor Tanya Monro is Australia's Chief Defence Scientist. Professor Simon Lucey is the Director of the University of Adelaide's Australian Institute for Machine Learning, which is the largest university-based machine learning group in Australia. Professor Anton van der Hengel, Director of the Centre for Augmented Reasoning, Chief Investigator of the Australian Centre of Excellence in Robotic Vision, and Professor of Computer Science at the University of Adelaide. And Dr Catriona Wallace, who's the CEO of Ethical AI Advisory and the Director of the Gradient Institute, a responsible AI consultancy. So AI is an incredibly controversial issue with a lot of excitement and enthusiasm, and also some level of fear and reticence associated with it. And the Australian government is investing extremely heavily in terms of wanting to include it as part of our international negotiations under AUKUS, setting up the new Australian AI Institute as part of DISA, and really looking to get guidance on what we can do and how they can enable AI to really level up Australia's success. Now, here we would like to jump over to Professor Tanya Monro to give an opening address and talk us through some of these issues. Tanya, if you wouldn't mind.
Thank you, Karly. And thank you first to ASPI for this report and for shining a light on this important topic. It's extremely timely, and it's a great privilege for me to be part of this distinguished panel. But first, to some thoughts. I'd like to start by exploring how Australia can build truly sovereign capability in AI and why that's just so important in our current world. Artificial intelligence is already part of our everyday lives, and our future prosperity relies on harnessing its power. And as we watch investment in AI increase around the world, Australia has a serious job ahead of it to stay internationally relevant and to become internationally competitive if we're going to realise the benefits of this technology across multiple sectors. And this is highlighted very strongly in the report released today by ASPI. For defence, AI will be critical to achieving our strategic objectives and maintaining a capable, agile and potent defence force. And as world events show us right now, that is increasingly important in what is an increasingly unstable world. Reflecting this importance and the need for increased self-reliance, robotics, autonomous systems and AI are sovereign industrial capability priorities. This is significant. Building a sovereign AI capability will enhance Australia's standing as a leading contributor to AI innovation and development. I think it's important to pause and recognise that Australia's capacity to play in this space depends on our world-leading research and development system. It depends on our research organisations and our industry. But we must build from this base, particularly building the specialist workforce we need through sustained investment in AI-related skills. Capacity in the Australian workforce will make sure that we can maintain an effective defence force and develop the future capabilities we need to overcome the disruptions AI presents and to benefit from some of the opportunities it offers, which I'll talk about. We also need to make sure we have focus on the infrastructure required. This includes sufficient computational capacity and fast networking, because it's all about data and the ability to harness and access and process data, because data is fundamental to AI. Data holdings need to be established and managed to support the development of AI applications and tools, buttressed by appropriate access and privacy protections. This requires leadership from government and sustained investment, and we must continue to do that if we're going to be able to benefit from a vibrant AI ecosystem in Australia that brings together not just government, because we don't within government have the capacity to drive the delivery that's needed, but across academia, industry, and our entrepreneurs. This is not just about meeting Australia's needs, but it's also about making sure that we create AI-related industries that are fit for export. And this indeed plays to the opening remarks Karly made around AUKUS. We know that the problems we face in national security can't be met by any nation alone. Australia's always known that as a middle power. But we're in a time now where our most critical allies, our colleagues in the US, the UK, and other allied nations are recognising that they too can't get after all the most critical problems alone. This is a huge opportunity for Australia. It's a huge opportunity because we can concentrate on building real edge in specific areas of technology that then can have strong export markets to allied countries. And we can develop them from the start for interoperability and interchangeability. And AI is no exception to that. To give you a flavour of some of the things already ongoing within defence, I'd like to introduce you, if you've not come across it, to something called DARENet, which stands for the Defence AI Research Network. Defence has established this network across Australia to support defence, bringing together the interdisciplinary teams we need to address challenges at scale. We never assume we've got the best solutions. We know that by working closely with our partners, we can harness that bigger brain's trust. But within Defence Science and Technology Group, which is my privilege to lead, what we do have confidence in is that we know the most pressing problems and that we can be the interface between the customer in the ADF and the R&D system by sitting between them as researchers within Defence. Defence also played a key role in establishing the Defence Cooperative Research Centre for Trusted Autonomous Systems, or the TAS CRC, and continues to support its efforts to transition autonomy research to industry. Now, a few quick words about governance and research. The potential applications of AI are very, very broad, and Defence is working on how to better coordinate activities to tackle this challenge. As the lead for the coordination of AI capabilities across Defence, we have the DAKE, the Defence AI Centre, which works across Defence's services and groups to corral, coordinate, and communicate across the very diverse range of AI-related activities underway, which range from using commercial solutions to developing bespoke solutions for defence problems. This includes building a technologically literate and ready workforce for AI within Defence. Defence Science and Technology Group works closely with Defence's Joint Capabilities Group within the DAKE together to promote a contemporary and agile understanding of AI within Defence. But this again requires partnership across our nation with allies. We underpin this from Defence by ongoing research in AI and autonomous systems, including unique hardware platforms, algorithms for managing autonomous platforms and systems, deep work on human and uncrewed system interfaces, on machine learning and intelligent decision-making, and scalable and fast distributed networking and collaboration. Now, some of this might be obvious to you when you think about some of the platforms we're working with in Defence, and some of it won't be. because I describe defence research and science and technology as a bit like an iceberg. There are bits you can see above the waterline, and there are other elements that are so sensitive that they must be done at high security classifications. But that does not stop us, if we get it right, working tightly and closely with people across the ecosystem to channel your good work to some of defence's more secure problems. And as we need to, we can bring people in and get clearances if we need to bring people inside to deliver outcomes. Importantly, all the research taken through defence is subject to senior oversight of the systems of just to give you an example, Defence's Starshot programs are owned by service chiefs in terms of the problems they solve, and we have regular sponsor reviews to make sure we're getting after the most critical problems. So the next topic I'd just like to briefly cover, because I think it's absolutely critical at this stage of the development of Australia's AI ecosystem, really comes to trust and ethics and building responsible AI. Maintaining oversight of defence AI research is one part of that. But within and outside defence, issues of security, of bias and of safety need to be understood and actively researched in order to inform responsible AI practices and to build our trust in AI systems. This will underpin confidence in the continued development of AI and the widespread use of resulting technologies, increasing the competitiveness of Australian industry. One thing I think requires quite careful thought is how we imbue Australian AI with Australian values, values that are so important to our key international partnerships with our allies in the defence and national security space. In the defence context, failing to adopt emerging technologies in a timely fashion gives us a military disadvantage. But in balance, premature adoption without a sufficient understanding of potential misfires can lead to very serious unintended consequences. And so responsible AI needs to be integrated across the defence enterprise, and we must keep up with the rapid pace of change. To do this well, we can't do it alone. We need to do this in deep partnership and consultation with academic, industry and international partners. And for me, as Australia's Chief Defence Scientist, it's absolutely critical that our Australian Defence Force has the best AI they need to make the best decisions they need to make. Back in September 2020, Defence participated in the first ever AI Partnership for Defence Forum with 13 other countries, which was organised by the US Joint AI Centre, focusing on ethical principles and best practices and establishing a forum to figure out the best way forward. And in addition, Defence was key in delivering an ethics for AI workshop, which led to a report that you can read, really laying the groundwork for how we establish ethical AI. In publishing this report, I acknowledged that Defence needs to invest in and capitalise on advances in areas like AI-enabled systems. But if we do this, we have to make sure that we have transparency, trust, and ethical AI before we bring them into service. And I acknowledge this is not just about technology, it's about how humans use technology, and it's about our policy that not only sets up our ADF to have better tools, but also sets up our industry to have better export opportunities. Now, while the outcomes of that workshop were a consultative effort across the ecosystem and don't represent an official defence position, they do form a very sound basis for developing Defence's way forward. So to wrap up my initial opening remarks, I strongly believe we have the opportunity, based on some of Australia's real niche strengths, to build sovereign AI capability for Australia that can make a really positive impact on our ability to defend our national interests, to play a role in our key partnerships, including AUKUS, and to counter threats against our sovereignty. And I really welcome opportunities like the one we've got today to get to the heart of some of the real problems and to forge some of the connections within this community and across our industry that are needed to make it happen. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tanya. And I can't think of a better way to set the context for this opening discussion. You know, you talked about partnerships, you talked about opportunities, the risks, the importance of ethics and trust. And I think they're all topics that we're going to get into today. And I guess now we will start with our panel discussion, and we'll open up to the rest of our extremely impressive panelists today. And Simon, I'm going to start with you if I can. So in your paper, as part of this, I don't think I've actually shown it. This is what the special report, the paper looks like that was released today, and it is a selection of about 15 or 16 individual papers written by experts looking at different angles of the AI issues. And Simon, of course, you talked about optimizing logistics and improving existing industries, and particularly looking at new ways of addressing old challenges, particularly in spaces like agricultural and natural resources industries. Can you tell us more about what some of those opportunities look like, and where some of the real benefits could be for Australia?
Yeah, sure, I'd love to. And also it was wonderful to follow on from Tanya's comments. So really enjoyed them, and the comments she had about sort of sovereign AI and the importance of sort of Australia positioning itself in that way. And I think it connects very well to other aspects of the economy. So agriculture, we have a long, proud sort of tradition of Australia being sort of an exporter of food of different types. But we are, like every other aspect of the economy, in a global competition. And so you have many other countries around the world rapidly automating. And I think sometimes when we talk about automation, we get really worried about like jobs and jobs disappearing. But in reality, it's the inverse. If we don't automate, jobs disappear, because basically it's all about productivity and being competitive. And automation is really about sort of making things more competitive. And so what I'm really excited by in this sector is sort of ideas around like shared autonomy. So rather than machines coming in and sort of doing everything, you can come in and actually having farmers working together with technology to make themselves more productive, more efficient, and to really to be able to kind of excel on the global market. And another part of this too, I think is really important, is that we talk about all the things that we have in the ground here in Australia. We have like amazing food, we have all these minerals in the ground, but another natural resource that we're sitting upon too is data. And data is a sort of a resource that and it's something that AI is unlocking. Like AI is sort of like the pickaxe that's sort of like digging down to the ground to kind of release these wonderful natural resources. But we have to really think about how we're navigating that too. And even in that agricultural sector, sort of, do we want to be sort of basically consumers, or do we want to be leaders? So Australia's had a proud tradition in this sense. And so automation is all about this, and AI is all about increasing productivity. And so I'm very bullish on this, and it's very important for Australia to position itself not as sort of just consuming and just sort of applying these technologies, but really leading them, and also kind of making sure that they're being used in the right way.
Yeah, that's great. And like, I think you make a really interesting point there about data and about the opportunities posed. Is the agricultural sector a good place to actually do a lot of that experimentation? We run into issues with privacy and personal data usage, and people thinking that it's going to go off and take over the world. And we'll get onto that topic with Anton in just a minute. But it doesn't mean, like, do we have the opportunity in these sectors to really experiment and do some really progressive things that may not be there in some of those other cases?
Well, I think so. I think that, for instance, like places where we already have strength, right? I'm a big believer that sort of it's difficult for Australia to start things from scratch, but areas that we already have strength are places that we can innovate and create opportunity, right? So we have this obvious area of strength in agriculture, and that's something that we can kind of really lean into. And I think sort of tying into with Tanya's narrative too, is about areas where we already have scientific excellence, and sort of diving into those as well and really building upon those. Because the big thing too, Australia's not going to do it by itself, but we have to have global excellence such that we can be seen in this global marketplace, and also be seen as a sort of a progressive, complexifying economy, rather than sort of just still digging things out of the ground. We want those things, but we want to complexify, and we also want to kind of really see how AI can make our children's lives richer and better.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's excellent. Thank you so much. And leading straight onto that, Anton, I'm going to jump over to you now if I can. So your paper, as part of this paper, looked at, you know, AI, the myths associated with AI and it being an existential threat, and it's, you know, why, you know, where that fear comes from. And that was a recurring theme through some of these papers. Paul Galby talked about some limiting factors and having difficulty attracting funding for topics like AI in healthcare. So, you know, what do you think those blockers are? And is it that the sectors don't understand that AI could be a benefit, or is it that AI has a real image problem? And how do the myths buy into that?
Yeah, thanks. I think AI does have a bit of an image problem, unfortunately, and there's a lot of fear out there, which I think is kind of ironic, given that everybody who's listening has used, you know, some kind of machine learning at least 100 times today, and you know, will continue to do so. The thing about machine learning is that it makes processes more efficient and more effective. It doesn't really do anything that people can't already do. So it's really I think the fear is largely misplaced, and particularly as Tanya and Simon have pointed out, that the risk really is about power shifting more than it is about, you know, the Terminator is not coming, right? With all of that kind of that here makes for great press releases, but I'm afraid it misses the issue. What we should be worried about in Australia is kind of the economic version of what Tanya is talking about, which is that the control moves overseas. Machine learning creates global markets. So Uber's a great example. You know, Uber sells rides in Australian cars on Australian roads, driven by Australians, you know, in Australian dollars, in a very highly regulated system. There's a lot of Australian rules, road rules, right? And nonetheless, 30% of the profit of every one of those transactions is going overseas because they own and control the data. And, you know, largely what Uber, so Uber, if you ask Uber, they're a data company, right? They're not a transport company. And that model will come to every other endeavor. And we will see the profit from these existing industries move overseas as they can improve the efficiency, not only of their own industries, but of our industries. So, you know, the risk, you were talking about health and medicine, you know, the risk in medicine is that people will vote with their feet. They will start taking up the offer of, you know, medical services offered overseas. You can get things delivered here in days, and, you know, going to the pharmacy isn't much fun. Trying to get into a doctor isn't a lot of fun either. And, you know, if you can do it online, who cares where it comes from, right? People will vote with their feet, not only because it's cheap, but also just because it's effective. And, you know, that process will continue. So the risk for Australia, you know, what should be keeping us up at night is exactly the loss of sovereignty that, you know, that we're all talking about, where these processes are controlled and run for the benefit of people overseas. Who's going to manage the environmental impact of farming on Australia if it's run by a company with a supercomputer in Texas? And which is happening right now, right? Anyway, yeah, I think we're worried about the wrong thing, to tell you the truth.
So, I mean, I guess Australia has a bit of form in terms of losing things overseas as well. We have obviously some skilling issues in terms of we have lots of research that shows that Australia has wonderful ideas and great research programs, and then we tend to export all our people and have difficulty gaining that economic impact from it. You know, what do you think? What do you think the problems are, and what we could do better in the people space?
So part of what we're missing out on in Australia is really people who want to innovate at that very deep level. we're very good at kind of 10% improvements to things. What we're not very good at is taking big risks. And we're not the only ones, right there. So, Israel, we're in the same position and now have the most dynamic startup culture in the world. What they've done is incredible. This is a very solvable problem, but as Tanya's just pointed out in defense, sovereign capability is critical. Google came out of 2 PhD students who realized that web search was a matrix inversion problem, right? They didn't start out with a small family search engine that they'd inherited and wanted to make a 10% improvement to. Right? That's not how that process works. Facebook identified an opportunity on the basis of the education they were getting to create an entirely new industry. They didn't start out with a small social media platform and try to make it 10% better. Unfortunately, we are competing in a great big world, and there is a lot of support out there. There are billions and billions and billions of dollars going around the world into developing sovereign capability in the countries that we compare ourselves against and a bunch of those that we don't. And we are unfortunately falling a long way behind in the many and various forms of sovereign capability that we need to compete. The markets that we need to compete in are global, and the cost of these transactions is almost zero. The cost to Uber of every journey you take is zero, and it's all profit. Their 30% of profit on every Uber journey you take is all profit. And the way that we engage is to join this process and to succeed in those global markets, because the alternative is that we just wind up as a place where Californians come to make money.
Yeah, that's a great point. Thank you so much. Catriona, I'll throw over to you now. So, you're an expert in issues around ethical AI, and your paper, as part of this paper, was really focused on those areas. I want to ask about, I've got lots of questions. So I'll start with the feel-good one first, about the latest developments in AI and AI for social good, because there's lots of really good opportunities there. At CES this year, the winner of that gold medal for Innovation Award in robotics was the US agricultural company John Deere, who's not a traditional player, or at least not an expected player in the robotics industry, because they developed and marketed a tractor-mounted sprayer that used computer vision to identify weeds and diseases, and then selectively spray herbicides and pesticides rather than drenching the entire lot. And it saves a lot of money and massively reduces the environmental impact. What are some of the other really exciting uses of AI that you've heard of where it can be used for those kinds of social good outcomes?
Yeah, so there's a whole range of it. And given that I normally get to talk about bad robots, this is such a delightful question for me to answer. Look, where we're seeing fabulous work being done, even by young Australian AI companies, is in using data analytics and data sharing based on machine learning algorithms to help solve social problems. So a great example of this is a young Australian woman-led company called SEER, S-E-E-R, Data Analytics. And SEER essentially works with different data sets across local government areas to pull together disparate data, run some algorithms over it to look at almost causal inference for social challenges. So whether it might be homelessness or other social problems, this young company very successfully works with these local government areas. We're also seeing advances, even work that my organisation, the Gradient Institute, is doing with applying causal inference techniques towards looking at the relationship between well-being of children and their school performance. So we're now at this stage where some of these social problems, the antecedents of them or the diagnostics of them are being done by machine learning algorithms, and that's fantastic. So that's one area we're seeing great social good coming from. The other area, of course, is healthcare. And we're seeing 3 times the level of investment into AI healthcare than we are really in any other sector. And I think that's a great thing. Another example of a young, really amazing Australian company that's doing work in this field is Lyronics. And these are some clever, again, university people originally who have built a AI-based voice box that is provided to people who have never been able to speak before. And I've seen some of the videos when these machine learning based voice boxes are implanted and the person speaks for the first time in their life, and it's just incredible. It brings you to tears. So across many sectors, we're now seeing AI for good, and there'll be many more examples of that to come. And I think Australia is in a good place to really take a lead on this. I mean, Anton and I speak regularly about the fact that Australia is not really famous for anything in AI, and we could eventually be famous for good AI, which is responsible AI, if we keep going. And wouldn't it be great if we were also famous for AI for good? So I'm hoping that'll happen.
Yeah, I think we're all in agreement on that issue. It would be wonderful to be known for that. So let's talk a little bit about the ethics and your work in ethics-related AI. There's lots of discussion about ethical AI in the public domain, and that is all for the good. How do we go about building trust and human-centered values around AI when we're a lot of different humans? And trust is such a human process. So how can we get and build trust in a way that will allow people to explore more with AI safely?
Yeah, great. So let's look at if we assume that doing responsible AI is a way, in fact, to build trust and build Australia as a trusted brand in AI. Let's go back to how well Australia is performing at being a country that is good at responsible AI. Now, last year, 2021, Gradient Institute, we ran a study of 416 organisations to measure their AI maturity, but most importantly, to measure how mature they were with regard to doing responsible AI. And the measure of maturity was actually only 8%. So less than 1 in 10 organisations in Australia would be regarded as being mature with regard to responsible AI. And the rest of them were really still at an early planning and initiating stage. So unsurprisingly, sort of tracking also the fact that Australia has been a bit of a laggard in just getting on the AI path, so we are too with responsible AI. But within that sort of slightly negative situation comes the positive one, which is because we are a bit behind, we also have the opportunity to start building these responsible and ethical frameworks from early in the piece rather than, for example, Meta. So Meta has 1,800 machine learning data scientists. They have 19,000 algorithms. They introduced their responsible AI program in June last year. Amazingly enough, how is that a thing? But anyway, and now they have to retrofit a responsible AI program onto that amount of people and algorithms. Incredibly difficult, if not impossible. What if Australia got ahead and actually started really, really pushing this building a trusted brand in AI globally through a really strong responsible AI program? And at the moment, I'm in market championing that we do this for the metaverse as well. So metaverse is the next big thing. Is it AI? Well, yes, it is. It's a bunch of other emerged technology, but it is also largely based on AI and machine learning. That's the next frontier of where things are going to go really badly ethics-wise. So we need to be absolutely on the front foot. And we have a great opportunity now to step ahead and get into this new tech, Web3, and build a responsible and a trusted brand.
You make such an interesting point about the metaverse, and I just want to pick at that if I can for a second. So we've been having some thoughts here about, the big social media companies like Meta have really been raked over the coals for their approaches to privacy and handling of data, probably, have sort of led the way in a lot of spaces and then had to backpedal a bit and try and figure that out. Do you have any thoughts about how that then plays out in the metaverse and particularly there's legislation and regulation going around at the moment, making social media companies accountable for what their users put on their platforms. Have you got any thoughts about how that can work in that metaverse space, and about how we make sure that that is a good and responsible place?
Yeah, I've got a lot of thoughts. Thanks, Karly. Look, the way we should think of the metaverse is there isn't actually a metaverse. There's multiple metaverses, and there's great competition between the big tech giants and also some of the gaming companies to actually set up and take that dominant space. So there are metaverses. The way we should think about metaverses are that they are new virtual worlds owned by tech giants or tech companies that have a profit incentive that they generate through engagement and advertising. So pretty much what social media is, but at scale, on steroids, 3D, fully immersive, but with no rules, no government, no legislation. So it is a frightening place to be. Don't get me wrong, I actually adore everything virtual reality, and I'm on a daily basis, I'll be somewhere in the metaverse, and at the moment working very closely with the New South Wales Minister for Digital, Victor Dominello, and speaking with Lorraine Finlay, our new Human Rights Commissioner, about their concerns at government level about the metaverse. So one of the ways I think so it is kind of a new frontier, largely ungoverned, and we even have stories such as a woman who was one of the beta testers for Horizon Worlds, which is Meta's metaverse, who within 60 seconds of arriving there to do a beta testing was attacked by 5 men and virtually sexually abused and assaulted. And so I've gone on the front foot here saying, how is it that the tech giants, the onus is on the individual to make themselves safe. The onus is not on the platform to keep them safe. And then with regard to anonymity, the perpetrators still are given anonymity so they don't have to be made public who they are, which is like crazy, right? So I think what I would love to do is see Australia, this would have to be a federal government, I think, backed by the state governments, but also strong industry bodies, to start to see how, again, we as Australia can play by really pushing for accountability from the tech giants and the platform providers, and really have this metaverse as a safe place for the vulnerable, because it really is not that now. And then I'm super interested from Tanya's work, how all of the 3D virtual reality then applies to what might happen in defence. I mean, there's a whole part there. So the metaverse is big, ungoverned, unruly, incredibly, insanely good place to be, but comes fraught with danger.
Thank you so much for that. There's a lot to unpack in there, and we really value your insights on that one. Tanya, I'm going to come over to you now. And again, I have a lot of questions. Obviously, Defence cares an awful lot about this, and with AUKUS and the collaborations going on, I'd be really interested in some of your takes on how we build that sovereign capability and working with partners. So you talked about in your paper bringing a multidisciplinary approach to AI research and requiring industry participation throughout the life cycle of AI. And in the context of AUKUS and making sure that we are going to have something that's resilient and defensible, how do we also make sure that it's well designed and we get that diversity of voices into that development process?
Look, that's a wonderful question, Karly, and it's one that I find myself pondering quite often. I think there's a couple of key elements here. We firstly need to bring in the broader community deep in to look at some of the problems we're trying to solve. And that's something that I think is quite foreign to the way we've worked in the past. In the past, if we're looking to acquire defence systems or solutions, we typically specify the defence system or solution we're looking for. But in this field, so much of what the magic sauce we're looking for is the way the human interacts with the AI system, the way decisions are made, deeply understanding how you build that trust and how you take that, that data and turn it into something that, can allow us to use all the advantages of computation, but keep the human in the right part of that decision loop. So, you know, everything you worry about ethics in civilian AI is there for defense AI. And then a whole deep, thick layer of additional consideration, because, you know, you can't skirt around it. Militaries are there to use lethal force when that's in the national interests. And thus that opens up, you know, significant additional, you know, consideration around ethics. So I think there's a few things. I think that firstly, it's about creating those trusted environments, just as you need the trusted AI, where you can really reveal the key problems you're trying to use it to solve and get the right people inside that tent. And that includes the entrepreneurs in the industry, because, you know, you need that pathway to the tech maturation. And at times, you know, it'll be about sucking in something that might have been developed for civilian purposes and playing with it and seeing if it can do something in a relevant context. But at other times, you know, we may need to do things at the earlier technology readiness levels. Now, to go back to your original framing around AUKUS, what's really interesting to me, and I've been very deeply involved in this, which is very poor for one's sleeping habits, because it means you've got meetings at all times of the day and the night. But what's really, really hit me is, I guess, just the strength of the commitment with my counterparts. They really want to use, or we all really want to use AUKUS to change the game of how we cooperate. And if we look at it, there's, you know, many decades of really powerful, high impact defense cooperation with our allies in highly secret areas. But what there hasn't been, in my view, is that really deep partnership on the co-development of solutions that bring in our industries and create those opportunities for those real export markets. But I think what shifted, as I said earlier in my opening comments, is that, you know, I think that, you know, probably one of the only really positive things about the deterioration in our global environment is a recognition amongst our allies that actually what our secret source is our allies themselves. And nothing would be more of a deterrent than really demonstrating very clearly that we can develop solutions together and quickly. So what I anticipate seeing more and more of is really tangible exercises, trials, demonstrations around real problems where we bring our wares, we bring our best people, and we give things a red hot go around really specific scenarios and have a bigger appetite for things going wrong, so that we also have a bigger aperture for new possibility. That's what I see happening. But I think it's going to require, I guess, everything we can do to try and bring along some of our broader R&D and industry base into understanding a defence context. Because, you know, try as we might to translate, I acknowledge there's a lot of jargon, and I'm only 3 years into this role and I still stumble across jargon I don't know as well. But I think there is a deep recognition within the defence enterprise that we need to do that.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head with the discussion about industry and that really importance of having everyone in there, including the people who understand the problem it is you're trying to solve, right? There's risks of having engineer groups just going off and doing their own thing with a lack of diversity in there and building solutions that aren't necessarily great. If I could ask the rest of the panel there, how do you get engagement from, I guess this is particularly for Anton and Simon, how do you get engagement from the wider community about some of those challenges that need AI solutions, or whether there are those opportunities? Like, are people coming to you and saying, I've got some ideas about a problem we'd like to solve, it could be AI, or do you find that are actually trying to bring people in to think about this as a challenge?
Well, I was going to maybe just jump in there, and I think one thing I'd like to kind of draw attention to is there's a lot to celebrate here in Australia in terms of AI, because I think sometimes it's really easy with AI to get sort of like dystopian and sort of like, oh, woe is me and what are we going to do? But the caliber and talent we have here in AI is extraordinary. I don't want to bore people with my own personal story, but I was actually a tenured professor at Carnegie Mellon University, the top AI university in the world. I left to come back to Australia because of the sheer amount of talent that's here. And the thing that I don't think we do enough is actually let our young people know and let our politicians know. We are like globally ranked in certain areas of AI. And so the big thing there is to really, we become what we see. I want to see young boys and girls getting excited about what can be done with AI. And I think in many of the things too is that AI is definitely software, it's definitely a sovereign issue, it's a governmental issue, but it's a fantastic science question. And that's one other thing I'd love to talk about too, is because science drives this. A lot of the issues that we're having with trust and explainability and the misuse of AI comes from a fundamental misunderstanding of how AI operates. We don't have a theory on AI at the moment. I kind of liken modern AI at the moment to sort of Samuel Morse with his telegraph. He was making lots of money, sending stuff over the line. No one had any clue about any of the theories behind any of that. And so it was abused, it was misunderstood. And so, and that's something I think a call to action for the government, a call to action for industry to understand that if you invest in these fundamental issues, you will actually make inroads into explainable AI, trustworthy AI, and also building a brand that Australia can be proud of. I love what Catriona was saying about sort of this idea about sort of a responsible AI brand, but it has to come from down deep. And we have these AI heavy hitters, people like Rodney Brooks, people like Richard Hartley, people who are sort of like, if you say those words on the global stage, people go, oh, I didn't even know he was Australian. It's like when you're saying a TV star or someone saying, I didn't know he was Australian. We have that caliber, and there's a lot to be excited by. And so that's one thing I want to kind of make sure that we're doing, the infectious excitement that is in this field and the science problems that are here and what we can do to solve it, and that Australia really can stand up and say with hand on heart that we can make a difference and we can actually establish ourselves in terms of having a voice on the AI platform around the world.
Well, actually, that segues nicely into, there's a series of questions here that we've got coming through. And I'm just going to jump to one of the most recent ones that's come in, which I just, because I think it's really interesting related to what you were just talking about, Simon. So this is a question that says, what would be your recommendation on where to start when getting kids to have the necessary skills to be future citizens that can build these AI capabilities? Where do we start getting the kids involved?
I would, so and I think I'd love to hear from all the group here on this, but I think maths and more maths. I think in many ways sort of computing is moving so fast, and STEM is so important. I kind of joke to the guys and girls in my group that AI research starts on the whiteboard, not the keyboard. It is maths, and so and the further and maths and diversity, making sure that we get as many diverse minds involved as possible. But that's where I would start, to sort of, and it's not just maths, but maths is the language of AI. And that's what we really need to make sure that we have ingrained in our kids.
Oh, you just made me very, very happy being a mathematician myself, that it's nice to hear people talk about the fact that in the same way that we study English in different languages, that maths is a language of science that underpins scientific concepts, and that could be a really interesting way of thinking about it. The rest of the panel, what would you do to get kids involved? How do we start?
I've got a few ideas on this, so which normally run a bit countercultural. So the other thing that we do know is that most parents in Australia have a concept that technology is somewhat the demon. So the kids are spending too much time on it. The kids behave badly when they come off it. The kids have mental health issues because of technology, and the technology gets blamed for a lot of it. And I think there is probably some truth in that. But the other thing that we don't do enough of, I think, as parents, and I'm a parent of 5, is actually encourage the kids to be solving problems, to be gaming, to be inventing, to be creating technology, because it's very easy for them to do, particularly the young ones now. And instead of us being, oh, woe is us, that we're bad parents if our kids are on technology, we know that kids have to have 10,000 hours of gaming to actually be some of the world's best problem solvers. So there's a whole thing I think we could change in the narrative around children being encouraged to use technology, for them not to think that their parents are anti-tech, but also, of course, to keep the kids healthy and well, and their physical health and mental health, emotional health well, still in touch with nature and all the things in the physical world. But I say just encourage these kids to get on and spend time gaming, creating software, experimenting with their friends, and encourage them rather than have them think it's a bad thing.
I might jump to some other questions here because we have so many and lots of really interesting thoughts. There's a few questions here that kind of touch on a similar issue about competitiveness in the geopolitical arena, particularly within the Indo-Pacific, and about different countries in the region who happen to have very large populations and no data regulation, having I guess a leg up on countries like Australia and the West who do have privacy protections and things like that, and how we develop safe and secure supply chains. So I'm having difficulty trying to pick which of these, particularly interesting, questions do we ask here. But I guess the question is, how do we, noting that we have friends under AUKUS and the strength that gives us, how do we make sure that we understand and are shaping AI in a way where we don't always necessarily have the advantages that other competitors might have, and how do we make sure that we adhere to our human-centered values and democratic principles, and yet establish a good and compelling industry that is competitive? Anyone? Sorry, that was a long question. I apologize for that.
I'll make a start as long as some of the other fabulous panelists will carry on from me. I think we've got a really winning combination as long as we grab it and run with it. And I think that combination is, we have some real advantages through our system of governance in the country and the degree to which we do have good regulation of data. I mean, if you just look at healthcare data, I think that's a huge advantage over, even though there are barriers of which were discussed in the report, and I think they need to be considered. But we have some huge advantages in terms of whole of nation data. But we also have huge advantages in terms of the creativity of our people and the strength of our R&D in this regard. And I think you could be negative and say we're a small population, surely the scale of our data is thus small, but I'd counter that to say many of the applications we need to work in, the volume of data is not the issue. It's actually the issues are the pull-through, the rapid pull-through of potential solutions to those problems. But I'd love to hear from colleagues on that.
Anyone else?
I'll kind of jump in there too. I mean, there's a fascinating book that was published a couple of years ago, AI Superpowers. They kind of like go into sort of some really interesting ideas about the AI future that we want. And I think in many ways, sort of, you could think about one AI future where it's just about big data and who's got the most people. And in many ways, that's sort of it's a very boring future. It's sort of very linear and you're just sort of chipping away. Whereas I think Australia should be betting big on really big on sort of this creative streak. So basically really going into our creativity, how we can make big quantum leap jumps in AI. And the crazy thing too, it's countries like Australia that stand the most to gain from automation. So countries with large population bases actually need automation less. We actually have a huge landmass, not very many people. We stand to gain the most from automation. So in many ways, sort of like that weakness is actually a long-term strength if we are able to invest properly.
Anton, Catriona, did you want to jump in with anything there?
Sure. I agree with all of that, and I think that a lot of the concern around this stuff winds up turning into, we need more rules, we need more regulations, we need more whatever, right? I think that the real challenge for Australia is that our position will be irrelevant. It's largely irrelevant now, and it's getting less relevant constantly. The way that we make our position relevant is to be a strong participant in this new economy. It's not something that's coming, right? This isn't a prediction about the future. It's about the 100 bits of machine learning that you already use today. The process isn't stopping. It's not optional. We can't put the brakes on. The question is whether we can run fast enough. We have amazing data here, and they're particularly, as the medical data is fantastic. We have a centralized health system that provides data that they dream of in the US, because their health system is so fractionated. That's probably not the right word, is it? But anyway, the health system is divided up into so many small pieces that they can't get that level of, particularly the continuity of data that we have here. It's really, really valuable data. And we're not exploiting the value either. And that means we miss out on the economic value, but it also means that we miss out on the health value that can be extracted out of that. There's an ethical question about what happens if we don't do this gear as well. But by and large, we have incredible liberal democratic institutions in this country. They provide a huge opportunity. When the big ships come in, the sailors all jump off and buy baby food, right? And they buy baby food by the pallet load, and they buy it because our liberal democratic institutions provide a guarantee that is trusted worldwide, that if you buy a jar that says it contains, pumpkin and carrot mush, then all there is in there is pumpkin and carrot mush, right? That we have that opportunity in Australia for AI as well, right? It has incredible value. We don't have to be good at everything. We don't have to take on, every possible industry, but that history of ours provides an incredibly valuable opportunity. We just have to leap on it.
Catriona, did you want to chuck something in there as well?
Yeah, well, Anton already knows that I 100% back his last statement, but mine is more just a comment on the investment into AI. So really at the moment, we have about 1/10 of the investment per capita into AI than comparative country like the US has. So we need to encourage more investment, and we saw a lot more investment because of the pandemic, which is very good. But even so, I chair a venture capital fund, BOAB AI, that invests in young scale-up AI companies. Our fund is still only $10 million. It's not $100 million. And the government last budget put in $124 million into Australia, including $54 million to create the National AI Centre. That's something, but it's not actually a lot compared to the several $1 billion of investment that the US government might put into their country. So I'd love to see more private investment and more government investment to start to really push our capability along.
I think we have time for maybe one more question, and I'm going to pick a couple here from Raj Sharma, who has some things for you, Tanya. So he said the discussion paper on AI framework that's been issued by CSIRO only relates to civilian applications. So does that mean there's a separate discussion paper likely to be issued by Defence for defence applications, and that are likely to be used there, or does that get contained in the defence community? And I think the reason he's asking is he's interested in learning about the tools that were used by your team in determining AI maturity. So are you able to say how that was done?
Look, thank you. That's an excellent question. And we work very closely in Defence with CSIRO colleagues. And as I said earlier, everything that matters in getting AI right in the civilian world applies across to Defence and then some. In terms of having a conversation, Raj, with us about what we're doing in Defence and some of the tools and frameworks, I would encourage you to reach out. We'd be very happy to have, we also have deeper conversations, but we also run events where we can bring people in and explore more deeply some of the the things we're looking to partner with folk from across the ecosystem as well. Because as I've said all the way throughout today, this is not just about what we can do alone, but what we can do together. We don't have a companion paper to the CSIRO one currently cooking, but that's something that may evolve. But as I said, we work very closely with CSIRO, who are our fellow publicly funded research agency, play a pretty similar role in the ecosystem. And I should just declare here, I sit on the board of CSIRO, so I'm very proud of also what they're doing in the AI space. Thank you.
Yeah, I thought that AI framework paper and the work that CSIRO has done in this space has been excellent, actually. It was one of the best explainers I've seen on AI issues, and I think that was really great work. We are very much out of time today, and again, I think we could probably talk about this around about forever. But I'd really like to thank so much our guests, Professor Tanya Monro, Professor Simon Lucey, Professor Anton van Hengel, and Dr Catriona Wallace for coming along today and sharing their expertise in a really interesting discussion. And also flagging that if you are interested in the paper, this is what it looks like. This is available to be downloaded from ASPI's website. And again, I think there's a bunch of really interesting and concise explainers about some of these really key issues that's well worth a read. So thank you everyone for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.